Welcome back to another episode of the Brandon Smith podcast. This week I was delighted to be joined by Kyle Patterson, who's a rugby referee up in Scotland. On the pod we discussed everything from the biggest challenges of being a rugby ref, to what would happen if concussion occurred on the pitch, to what would it be like to be the ref in a Rugby World Cup final. As always, we had time for your questions at the end. If you'd like to submit questions for the next guest, follow me on my socials where I will announce who is coming on the channel. If you're listening here on Spotify, feel free to give me a follow and a rating. And if you're listening on YouTube, be sure to subscribe. As always, thank you so much to Kyle for coming onto the pod, and thank you for listening to this one. Enjoy the podcast. Okay, so let's go. Okay, so I'm wondering how you first got into reffing rugby. Why did you want to become a rugby ref in the first place?
Well, Brandon, normal answers is, useless players generally go into refereeing, pretty much. No, like I said, I did play rugby in school. Wasn't any good at it. I hurt my back in a game and then I gave it up because I was a complete wuss. I never really got back into it, but obviously I've always enjoyed watching rugby and talking about it with my friends or just folk on various forums and social media. And then I just decided, why not give ref a go? It could be a way in. It could be a way I could give back to the game in some way, even if it is just at one of my local teams. I was staying in Aberdeen at the time, just one of my local teams there. So yeah, and then I looked into the SRU, and there's various law courses and various sort of training things I had to do online, which I passed. And I did my law exams and that. There's options for anyone to do the law exams on the World Rugby page, if they want to, of course. And then by luck, chance, I saw that there was a level 1 refereeing training course happening at Montrose Rugby Club, which at the time wasn't too far from when I stayed in Aberdeen. So I myself up to do that. It was a free course, thankfully, and then I just kind of got into it from there, really.
Yeah, and it's interesting that you say that, because I played rugby as well, and I did think about rugby, becoming a rugby ref, but I don't know if I could face all those massive props and number 8s all looking down at me and giving me grief. Just to give people an understanding, what sort of level are you at as a ref, and what are you allowed to ref?
Well, I've done up to level 2 training courses. I mean, the SRU has a way of it goes from level 1, which is their bottom, level 2, then level 3, and then after level 3 it goes into the academy level, and then it's basically goes on from there. But yeah, no, the levels I do basically all sort of schools rugby, and I can do adult games. Division 2 and 3 in Scotland, where it is. But obviously in Scotland there's separate regions. So you've got Caledonia, which is more of the north. You've got the west of Scotland, which is where I'm at now, which is obviously based in and around Glasgow and the west of Scotland. And you've got sort of the Midlands as well, and the borders. Those are, I think, the main regions around Scotland. So it just depends obviously where you're at. I mean, you find most referees get into it, as well as being players who just can't do it anymore, and also a lot of them find that you find are attached to clubs, so they're either still playing for clubs or they're associated with the clubs, and they get in through the door they can get in through the doors doing refereeing that way. Known plenty of referees up in Scotland who've done that. So yeah, just. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, definitely. It's I remember when I was younger playing, probably about 6, 7, 8. You'd always get the dad who would be the ref or something like that, or a parent, or someone would become a ref, or one of the older players would be the ref. And I think it is important that children get that experience of a ref, what it means to be ref, someone that actually knows the laws. Although you want to encourage them to enjoy the game and have fun, it is important to become a ref. Do you think in Scotland that there's a lack of referees, or do you think that's pretty good? Because here in Wales, especially at grassroots level, sometimes there will be no ref for a game, or it'll be really hard to find a referee. Do you get a lot of requests to ref games?
It's a mixed bag, really. I think obviously a lot of the stuff I get is allocated through the SRU's panel, which goes across all the regions in Scotland. So that's how I kind of get games that way. But obviously, I think they sometimes still struggle at school levels and mini rugby levels, actually. Even though there's, I can understand maybe there's some referees or players who think, oh, it's just like kids rugby, but it is also a good. It's just a good. I think that's also just a good way to get it in and get experience as well. Even though obviously the laws are a bit different in kids rugby to adult rugby, so that can sometimes be a bit of a brain worker. You've got to. I mean, you actually have to think a bit more in kids rugby than you do in adult rugby. Because sort of as I say, some laws like where they're not allowed to kick the ball. I think that's on S1 under 14s level or under 13s, pardon me, where you're not allowed to kick the ball at all, and if you do, it's a free kick to the opposition, and those kind of things, which sort of normally you think, okay, not a big deal on that, and obviously because they're kids as well. I mean, I've had a few like tellings off for maybe awarding too many scrums, and obviously for safety reasons, scrums completely different at that level. But whereas kids, sometimes it's just a case of you have to be a bit lenient with knock-ons and that, which can be a bit so because you still award them obviously if they're obvious knock-ons. But I mean, aside from that, with the coaches, it can be a bit of a debacle. So
yeah. I want to take you back to your first game ever. Do you remember it? What happened and how are you feeling?
Yes, I do actually. It was a women's game out in Inverurie, which is just up north of Aberdeen. I remember it pretty well actually. Main reason I remember it because my first line out, I blew up for not straight throwing, and I award the free kick instead of giving the opposition the option of scrum or line out. I completely messed up that law.
Did they call you up on that?
They did at half time, yes.
Right.
That was good. I was like, oh, and then like with goal kickers, I was a bit unsure where to stand initially, and then ended up standing like right behind the kicker. Obviously, like not in the range of them lining up their kicking that. But those are the two things that stand out to me. And I was just nervous as hell throughout the game. But afterwards, I mean, everyone seemed to think I did okay. For the first time, I thought I did all right. But then, it didn't get exactly easier as I went on, let's say that.
And it's interesting that you say that, like making calls and things like that. What do you find are the biggest challenges for you as a rugby ref?
I say mainly with positioning. Often that's personally. I mean, there's maybe some others that are going to say differently, but positioning for me is something I've found a bit challenging sometimes. Often, like you're obviously there's example. There's a breakdown on like the far side. You've ran all the way over to there. You want to make sure you're in a position that when a tackle occurs, you can see the ball. And it is, then you're just making sure the tackle rolls away, and then you're trying to step back, making sure you've got a clear view of not just how the players are entering the breakdown situation, but also you've got to be keeping a view on the offside lines of both teams when they appear, and also make sure that the ball is clear and making sure what's going on there as well. So there's a lot of things to think about in many situations. So I'd say probably the most challenging, I'd say, positioning very often, but it's something I'm getting better at. And again, that's something that just I think most referees just find is just work. And there are times like where there's not always a right answer. I mean, you'll say some referees who say this is your exact positions all the time, but as you know, in games, like there's lots of things that can happen. Lots of if the ball goes one way, then can quickly go back the other. So you often find yourself, if that happens, ducking quite well. But again, that depends on the level of the teams as to how often that actually happens. I think from my point of view, positioning, and also sometimes you don't really have time to think, and this is where the challenging thing comes in as well, because sometimes you just have to go with first thing you see, and because you're going off instinct all the time. that's where the mistakes can come in. But I mean, again, that's just practicing and knowing the game and learning how to keep control of the game as best you can. I mean, you're always still going to make mistakes. There's no referee across at any level who doesn't go through any game without making one mistake. It's just making sure you don't make too many big ones, that you're on the ball as best you can for 80 minutes.
And I got to ask you a question, and I'd ask this to any ref. Do you actually know what's happening at the scrum, or are you just guessing?
Oh, jeez. That says it all. I mean, generally, try and keep the main focus on the front rows, which this is a whole thing I'm quite critical of where the game is at now. Because, I mean, I think most refs are on the same boat as the spectators, in that they just want to get the scrum over with. And that's where you'll find a lot of guessing goes on at the scrum. And to be honest, with the vast majority of referees, you'll find they're favouring the pack that's got the momentum, that's going forward a bit, as to what they'll penalise. But even so, that's not always as simple as that, because, you want all 3 front rows on each side. You want them all to be shoulders straight and square throughout the whole time the scrum is happening. And that just doesn't happen 100% of the time. There's too many times, like, there's subtle pull-ins and pushing-ins, and, you've obviously got to keep your eye on that, and you've got to keep your eye on the ball going on in straight, which is,
exactly.
which referee is consistent at that these days. And then obviously the whole thing with the back row, you've got to call it, make sure the back row are bound. Again, another thing that referees are very inconsistent on, I find, and I include myself in that category as well, I guess, is because the back rows are meant to keep their full arm on to their teammate in the scrum until the ball has left the scrum. So that's something that, again, is a very mixed bag as to how that gets refereed and picked up, because so many referees are obviously focusing on the front row. So it's, I don't know, at times it is a lottery. But, I think sometimes I do just wish we could just go to the old days of, just have the scrum set up and, like, just get the scrum half to sort of make sure it's steady up. If you remember, like, in the 70s, like, Gareth Edwards and the likes used to do that a lot. The scrums would just move around a bit, and you'd have the scrum half just pushing them up. But with all the health and safety stuff, it's just the way it is, and the players getting bigger as well, I think, will help that for the better in many ways. So, yeah, it's a bit of a lottery, let's just say that.
Yeah, it's like hard to see, because obviously you can only see one side of the pitch, and at your level, obviously you don't have the TMO, you don't have anything like that to help you, so it generally is your call. But I'm sure that through reffing games you gain experience, and you can see maybe how away the scrum goes down, and you can instantly, in your head, kind of have an idea of probably what's happened. And that's probably all over the pitch, if someone's gone down here, or if they've gone around the side of the ruck here, or the ball's come out here, you probably 60% of the time know why that's happened. Is that right?
I would say roughly but also, like, a lot of it in terms of especially at the lower levels, no disrespect to any lower level players watching this, where the technique just isn't there. The same, like, so there's a hooking contest that sometimes just spurts out the side, and then that's basically can be a free-for-all if it's not hooked back properly, it just comes out the flank side. But I mean, generally you find with most referees, they start off on the side, the scrum half's putting the ball in, and then you have to try and step back a bit, so you've got a bit of a view of what's happening on the other side. But again, generally, if you're seeing a lot on one side, you go to where the problems are most occurring and then try and sort it there. But players can be, like, sly and try to get away with stuff, and it's like it's impossible to keep track of absolutely everything. But you do your best, and it's quite difficult sometimes, because there's something going on the other side. Like, if the scrum goes down in that, sometimes you miss seeing who it is that brought it down first, so you end up, like, just calling quite a lot of resets, which is no fun for anyone. I'd say it's probably actually not quite as bad as at lower level with regards to keeping the scrums up, even though the stuff I'm mentioning still happens. But in terms of keeping the scrum up, I wouldn't say it's quite as bad as it is at the highest level. with just how many reset scrums there are and all that. So.
I'm wondering what your style of reffing is. Do you want to get the game flowing, or are you more like, I need to be in control of everything, or do you try and balance it as much as possible?
Balance it where I can. Obviously, you do want to see good rugby, but also you want to make sure you're by the book with the laws as best you can as well. Obviously, I'm quite a communicative ref. I speak to the players quite often, sometimes too much, I get told, which is fair enough. That's something I'm working on. I'm trying to, basically, you want to see a game. You don't want loads of scrums, but if they're knocking it on and all that, you've got to ref by the laws. So yeah, a balance. Yeah.
Yeah, and communication is a really big part of the game. Someone that two refs I think are brilliant communicators are Wayne Barnes and Nigel Owens. I think they both are constantly communicating with the players and explaining what's going on, say leave it or say no or ball out or whatever. As you said, you think maybe you speak a little bit too much. And communication with the players, as I said, is important. Do you get players sometimes back chatting you, or is rugby much more? Is it a lot?
Again, it depends on the character that's in the game, but you obviously got to make sure your authority is stamped on that. I mean, I don't mind players actually speaking to me if they're a bit unsure about something and asking a question. And if I have the answer, I'll just give them the answer. But it's when it carries on, you don't want to get too much of a dialogue. You just explain your decision and try your best to walk away. So, I mean, it's not always the easiest. And also, there's occasionally times when players do try and, go on the edge and see what we can get away with. And again, that's just a case of, giving them a warning. If they're not taking it, then you start awarding penalties and you keep going from there. And then if you do that, I think the players understand where they're at and how the game's going to go if they're not going to listen to you.
Because I know you're not the biggest fan of Dan Bigger, who
no,
who loves to talk to refs. As you said, it's getting the balance between obviously the player speaking respectfully to you, asking you why have you awarded that, or explaining his situation. Are you one of those refs who say, I'll only talk to the captain, or are you happy to talk to all of the players?
I have a preference that it does. I think I've just, this is more I've refed, I've actually had a preference of it going through the captain. Because maybe in my early days, I was a bit naive about this and I was thinking, just going through the captain is fine. But now I fully understand it a lot more, so I feel a lot easier if it goes through the captain, most especially when it comes to some penalty decisions or free kick calls, and I'm just wanting to know what's the call, and I'm taking the captain shouting at me, because there's sometimes you get 5 or 6 players just saying we're doing this, and then let me start again. You get one player saying we're doing this, another player saying we're doing that, and when it gets to that point, I'm like, no, I don't want to listen to any of you, just the captain's call, and then we'll go from there. So I mean, that's so I have a preference to only speak to captains and for players to go through their captains and speak to me. I say that in my pre-match chats as well. I have a preference for that. But obviously, if there's any individual I need to speak to, or the front rows, for example, if I need to speak to them or they're unsure on something, I don't mind them asking me. But obviously, you don't want to get into too long dialogue, otherwise it's just going to be a mess.
Yeah, you spoke about your pre-game chat with both teams. What usually is said in that? Do you say these are the areas I'm going to be focusing on, or do you say, I just want a safe match or something like that?
I mean, I just say what I'm expecting of the players, basically. Just basically say, sort of go through your captain politely speak to me, vice versa, and then I sort of lay down what I'm looking out for, the main things I'm looking out for at the breakdown, making sure that the tackle release is obvious for me to see. Even if it looks silly sometimes, the players putting their arms up after they made a tackle, but as long as I'm seeing they've clearly released the player after they've made the tackle and that, I'm absolutely happy. Doesn't matter to me how silly it looks. I sometimes make sure I'm aware at the breakdown situations how lenient I will be if there's a player who happens to be on the wrong side, and as we all know in games that can happen accidentally. I'm fully empathetic of that, but also you don't want players to be lying around there and taking the mick and that, and you have making sure you set your standard there and say if you're clearly not making any effort whatsoever to roll away, and it's obvious to me, and you're just putting your hands up but still lying over the ball, then, sort of that's your responsibility, and I'll penalise you. And just also any law changes, because laws change from season to season, as we're all aware. I just go through with the players, making sure they're all aware of it, and just basically how I ref the law changes, so they can get a bit of a grasp on that as well. So, like I said, sometimes sort of good, a lot of communication on that front's good. Other times, like there's other referees, and I've had ref coaches saying to me, you don't need to overdo it in that department. But I mean, I just think it's important the players know what you're expecting of them, where you stand on certain things pre-match, and also making sure you're getting a safe game, and that the players respect your calls.
Definitely. I was going to ask about. I forgot what I was going to ask now. That's good. I'll have to cut this bit. I completely forgot what I was going to ask, and it was a good question as well, which is even more annoying. What was it? Fuck's sake! Come on, think. Oh shit. For fuck's sake, I completely forgot what it was. Oh yeah, I know what it was. Do you think players are aware of the rugby laws enough so that when you ref them, they understand why you're making calls, or do you find that a lot of players just simply don't know the laws that well?
For the most part, it's fine. I mean, I find generally as schools rugby a bit of a mixed bag sometimes. And also, because a lot of clubs I do, you sometimes have like first or second time players, and sometimes you can often tell who is the newbie, and sometimes they're a bit slow with getting the laws. But I mean, you try and work with that, but also you've got to make sure they know what they're doing. But for the most part, in my experience, players know the laws very, very well, so no issues with that overall.
What about coaches? Are coaches the same? They understand the laws fine?
Yeah, I've never had a problem with that. I mean, there's sometimes you get, because of course there's some laws, because there's so many laws, which is quite interesting, because, all these different laws, they're meant to sort of tighten the game up so everything's clear, but you put so many laws, it makes things a lot more unclear. And then there's some coaches who will interpret something at a breakdown differently to you, and then they'll ask you about it and maybe say like, oh, why, you gave this for that, and why didn't you give it for that? And I understand why that can be frustrating, but sometimes that just, I don't know, it just happens just because sometimes you're just, you miss something earlier in the game, maybe, so you're still getting into it. You have to try and be switched on from the start, but there's times you miss things, and then later on you pick it up, like, okay, I've got that time, and that can, understand, be frustrating for coaches. But in terms of coaches' law knowledge, I've mostly not had a huge problem. Still, like I said, with players, there's some of them who do try and take the biscuit and do try to get on at you, but on the whole, not a problem from my experience.
And parents can be a big issue, especially in football. When I used to play football, the amount of times the ref would get the abuse, like, you're blind, you're stupid, you should go to Specsavers, whatever. But that's probably quite in a polite way that I said it. Do you find parents are more respectful in rugby?
Yeah, actually, I don't have that much problems with the parents, because most of the games I do, it turns out the parents are part of the coaching team, and some cases, in a lot of cases, but obviously you do get parents there as well. But I've had some issues with folk who've maybe just gone to see their mates, and they've been out drinking all day, and they're shouting, the ref, you do get the back chat and that sometimes, but it's about how you deal with it. I mean, if it's just on the sideline, you have to learn to just try and switch off as best you can. But if it's getting to the point of where you're like, no, I'm not putting up with this, you just say no, and you make sure you got your stamp on things. And if there's, because I know there's some referees who've had folk in the crowd, giving them grief, and folk from the subs bench and folk just shouting all manner of nonsense, and they've had to stop games because of it, and quite rightly so. I've luckily not had to stop. I've been on the verge a couple of times, but I try and just have a word with the crowd if some members of the crowd are getting too much, to say you need to quieten them down a bit. So just got to remember, as the ref, it's your authority, it's not theirs.
Definitely, that's a really important part of the game, that And that's something we don't want in rugby. In football, it's a massive problem, I think, especially at the lower levels. It's ridiculous, what refs get called. And refs are taking their time out. Obviously, they do get paid for it, but it's not a ridiculous amount. To go ref a game, they go into reffing because they love the sport and they want to give back to the game. And yet they're getting this crap from John down the road or something who probably doesn't really understand the laws himself and is just shouting some random shit. And so it's just really annoying to hear that kind of crap when you're trying to do your job. Have you ever been in a game where you've seen a piece like a move or something like that and think, flip me, that was good, and you just have to stop for a second?
Well, that's an interesting thing. I've had a couple of games that's happened, but you don't stop yourself. You're keeping up with if it's an open play, you're keeping up with the ball. So you're basically, tracking where the ball's going, into players' hands, etc. So, I mean, I've generally found that I've not been. I've generally thought there's some players like, well, he or she's pretty damn good, aren't they? And you just kind of, but generally so focused on getting your decisions right and what's happening in the game, you don't think about it too much. Just think of how they're playing within the laws.
Yeah. At the end of the game, so the game is finished. Everyone shook hands, or not anymore, obviously, because of Corona, but everyone shook hands in general. Do you have to write a match report at the end of your game and explain what's happened or any decisions that you made?
I don't generally have to do a report. It's optional on the database I use. But generally, if you sometimes coaches come up to you and speak to you, not always the nicest way. But I mean, I think it's but I do have to do reports on red and yellow cards if there's that in the games. I have to write them down and send them in to my authorities just to let them know what's happened. And I have to do a report on that. But it's only really the scoreboards and red and yellow cards I have to do a report on. And I have an option of doing how I thought I did in the game. But in terms of reports from coaches, that sometimes I get a ref coach gives me a report that way. Pardon me. And with regards to teams coaches, I normally find it's best if you just after the game you just shake their hands and then walk away for 10, 15, 20 minutes just to calm down a bit, give them time to calm down, go relax, take a shower and get changed, etc., and then speak to them. Because sometimes in the heat of after the game's finished, there can be emotions running high, especially for losing teams. So as long as you sometimes just want to shake hands, just get the hell out of there.
Definitely. Do you think since you've started reffing there's been an increase in yellow cards and red cards, or do you think because of the law changes you've seen a decrease in the amount that's been given out?
Well, certainly at the top level there's a lot more of them. And I say, my level I'm doing this well, we have to referee stuff like the high tackles very similarly to what they do at the highest level. But I make sure my players know where I'm standing on that. So again, mostly I'm not a problem, but the cards are definitely across the whole game. I think I'm just going from what I've seen, are going up a lot more. And again, that's people can argue, it's through game, but again, a lot of these things are, brought in to try and make the game safer. And we don't want, anyone, going in with bad concussions and getting bad dementia or worse, or as bad or worse after the playing days are over. So it's it's something I'm more supportive of. I mean, I'm not generally with these folk who are like, oh, the game's going soft and that, and I mean, it's not true. I mean, there's a lot of the stuff, I mean, even in the 70s, like some of the tackles JPR Williams did, they were even illegal back then. They just weren't spotted so much, or caught up so much. So it's like, stuff like that's never been exactly legal. And I mean, so that's just the way it's gone. And obviously, so I mean, for the most part, I'm in favour of it. There's sometimes I'm thinking, could be a bit like if there's a high tackle, for example, if the ball carrier ducks and you just dive into a player's arm, it's accidentally slip up. I mean, that stuff like that, I'm thinking to me, that's just a penalty at best, because you can tell that the player's gone down. He's trying to, sort of make a clear tackle and the player just ducked into his arm there. And I think, it doesn't need to be much more than that. And sometimes as well, I have to say with these aerial challenges, I think there needs to be a bit of a look down there. Obviously, I get from the health and safety, absolutely understand with regards to players landing on their heads or anything above the tops of the shoulders. I mean, I understand why that's a red card because I'm trying to cut that out. But sometimes it happens in games where you just think, a complete accident, a bit of a collision, and sometimes you think, is that fair for a red card and that? But it's
yeah, you've got to try and be consistent with those things, and it's really important that the game is safe and enjoyable for people to get involved in. I do think that it's important that these things are carried out, and although some people may say the game's gone soft, etc., players are getting bigger. So if it's a legal hit, it's going to be as strong, as powerful as ever before, but it's just legal. That's the only difference I see it being. We've got a couple of listeners' questions, which we'll get to in just a second. I've got a question for myself that I'm really intrigued with. When someone scores a try, how do you know where the conversion is meant to be taken from?
In line with the try scorer, I normally go to roughly in line of where the try's been scored, like raise my arm up and try, and then I walk back in line of where the ball's been grounded back to quite far back, and then the kicker can go in line with me as far or as near as they like. So that's pretty straightforward. I find.
That's very simple. One question before we get to these listener questions about the support you get as a rugby ref. Do you feel like Scottish Rugby supports you as a ref enough? Is there enough support there for you if you wanted to go to another level or just at your level?
Mixed bag. I mean, again, obviously there's things. A lot of it's online now. People and contacts you speak to. I mean, I've had plenty of decent coaches and higher ups and more experienced refs offer me advice, and are perfectly good people to talk to. I'd say, in terms of stuff like fitness and nutrition and that. I mean, that's you're kind of left to your own devices there. At my level anyway, obviously when you go further up the ranks, there's going to be a lot more, supervision and a lot more policing of your diet and your what you're doing in the week and all that stuff, they do at the pro level. But I mean, I think it's a mixed bag, and in terms of moving up the ladder, it's a bit, I don't know. Again, but I think it comes down to if you get really good and you keep getting better and better, and then you'll get folk noticing you, and then then they know someone that goes to the top. Because I know someone who's on my level 2 course, and she's now at the highest level, the Scottish referees right now. Just again, and I mean, I'm not knocking her at all. She's really good, much better than I am. But I'm just saying, again, it also depends on, I think, who you know, and also remember, and you've got to make sure you keep putting the hard work, keep getting better, and I think that's the way to go. Just keep working, really, and a lot of it comes from personal responsibility, but the outside support, I mean, I think it's been okay what I've seen. I mean, it could be better, but could be a lot worse.
Yeah. You spoke about your first game, which was a women's game. What are the main differences between reffing a men's game and a women's game? Is it very similar, or are there certain things you need to look out for a little bit more?
If I give my full opinion here, I'm going to get the sexist comments coming in from somewhere. The women's game generally, I found, is a bit softer, but it can be easy. It can at times be a bit easier to referee, though, I have to say. But again, it all comes down to a lot of individuals. But I mean, I've generally found that women's rugby, I've found a bit more empathy coming my way than with men's rugby. That's what I can say of that. But in terms of the standard of rugby, I think the men's is still just better. I mean, there's some good. I'm not saying women's, rugby is generally bad. I mean, it could always be better, but there are some good plays. But I just think, pardon me. But I think you notice the difference. But I enjoy doing both. I mean, I find women's a bit easier. I'll be honest, and You can have the comments flying, he's a sexist or whatever, but that's just my honest opinion. If you disagree with me, you're perfectly entitled to.
What about sevens rugby? Would you have to get a different qualification for that, or is that exactly the same qualification?
Not really. The level I'm at, I mean, sevens is a fantastic one for fitness, and it is fantastic for giving yourself a good run around. Albeit, I wouldn't recommend doing more than 2 matches in a row. I've had times where I've done 3 matches in a row, and the third match I was completely knackered, and I missed a forward pass. I missed apparently a forward pass that was apparently obvious, and I missed a couple other things as well. So it's just, again, at sevens, again, it's just reading up the laws, like making sure you're fit and you can keep up with 14 players, normally 7 minutes a half, 10 minutes if it's a final of a tournament, usually. That's how it's done. So, I mean, again, it's just knowing your laws, I'd say, with sevens more than anything else, which everyone can do. The law books are free online, so, yeah.
Yeah, we've got a couple of listener questions just to finish with, and we'll get through them on the podcast. If anyone wants to send in their questions for any future guests, just follow me on Twitter and you can find out who's going to be on. So the first question is, do you think the elite refs approach to discipline and challenges from players is helping refs like you?
Oh, very, very mixed. That's a tough one. Again, I don't know. It's quite hard, because sometimes when you see a ref, you can empathise with them, but I can understand there's some folk who are were disappointed with the standard of refereeing at the World Cup. In terms of, but again, I get, why there's maybe more frustration at that level, because you've got all the technology in sight and that, and even still stuff that isn't perfect or doesn't suit some people's liking. Social media doesn't help that either, in my opinion. I don't think social media helps anything in sport, because you get a referee call, it's a bit 50-50, so, and you'll get folk taking photographs and manipulating it and looking at little snippets, things. It's just, it boils my blood, and it's irritating as fuck. Folk who are behind their keyboards and they just have all the time just to nit everything, and then referees where you've got 1 or 2 seconds to make that call. And TMOs, again, in terms of how the TMO is used, right now it's still basically for anything that's in the build-up to a try or foul play in that regard. So, it's... does it help? I'd say in terms of learning, it can help. But again, with regards to player discipline, I think it's normally okay. But in terms of the standard of refereeing, mixed bag. So hope that answers the question.
Definitely. The next question is there any particular ref that you look up to?
I think Nige is an obvious one. Nigel Owens, not just because of his refereeing, but the way he, obviously all he's gone through in his personal life as well. Got a lot of respect for him. I think sort of the way he speaks to players as well, and he's okay having a joke sometimes. There's other folk who think, he can be the centre of attention and bloody blah. All nonsense, really. He's doing his job. Players respect him there, and also the way he understands what refereeing is. I look up to him there. I'd say also from way back when there were some referees I looked up to, Jonathan Kaplan, folk remember him. Jim Fleming from way back the late 90s. Sort of was a refereed the France-New Zealand semi-final in 1999. And obviously, because he's Scottish, he's someone I thought was very good. His game, Ed Morrison as well, was excellent back in the day, even though there was a couple of matches he had against Scotland in the 90s where he didn't exactly favour us. But hey-ho. But no, I think Nigel Owens is the main one, and the rest of the names I mentioned, always good to listen to them and get their perspective as well. Especially, actually, I find from listening to older refs, there's videos from on YouTube of interviews with the likes of Ed Morrison. We talked about the 1995 World Cup final and how there was one decision against the Springboks where there was a try scored, but it was missed because he thought Frank Bunce got under. I think it was a pick and go or something. He thought Frank Bunce got under the ball carrier, but there was footage show that the ball touched the grass and Ed Morrison missed it. So, and obviously that was back in the days when they didn't have TMO. So I think stuff like that from like an understanding point of view can be helpful, but you don't want to be making the same mistake like that yourself. So, yeah.
Definitely. And final question is, someone has said, I want to get into refereeing myself, but what fitness level do I need to be at?
To be honest, like at the lower levels, it's just basically a case of making sure you're going out for runs fairly regularly. If you've got a gym, I normally do when the gym was open, not now. I normally do about 40 minutes on the treadmill. There's sprint drills. There's tons of stuff online with regards to how to keep yourself fit, what helps you with refereeing, and sprint drills that help as well. I mean, there's tons of resources and there's tons of stuff from ex-referees and referees, coaches putting their stuff online, give you advice. So, yeah.
And finally, if you could ref any game in the world that you wanted to, so World Cup final, Six Nations decider, Pro 14 decider, whatever it be, what would you ref? Scotland against England, World Cup final?
Well, because I'm Scottish, I wouldn't want to be refereeing that.
Wales against England, favour us if you want, I don't mind.
I would say that World Cup final, but if Scotland are in it, no.
Yeah.
Even though that's very doubtful, I know that. I think I don't. It's a toughie. I mean, if Scotland aren't involved, I would like to do a Six Nations decider, and I would like to, I think, referee a New Zealand South Africa game. I think that would be, sort of see two masters at generally quite contrasting styles of rugby. And if we were talking about this in the late 90s, early 2000s, or like late 90s going through till about 2010 or something like that, I would say the Pledgesville World Cup as well. Australia and New Zealand, I think they'd be but they'd be lung busters, but I think I'd have a fun time refereeing those games. I mean, not so much now, of course, because Australia are way off New Zealand right now. So, I think, probably those games. And I wouldn't mind doing a World Cup final if Scotland aren't in it. So,